Chapter 1: The Oracles Chosen. The recycled air tasted like copper pennies and broken dreams. Elara's fingers trembled as she measured the gray paste from the dispenser, muscle memory guiding her through morning rituals that had worn grooves in her soul. The sustainment plopped into their shared bowl with the enthusiasm of wet cement. 3 portions dispensed with mechanical precision, basic nutritional requirements for 2 individuals, subsistence tier. Each glob landed with wet slaps that echoed off polymer walls designed to contain rather than comfort. The chemical sweetness hit her nostrils first, artificial vanilla struggling to mask the underlying metallic tang that clung to everything in Hub 7. No matter how many filtration cycles the advertisements promised, that taste never quite disappeared. The flavor of recycled hope processed through machines that had never known hunger. Half dose, she decided, palming the small white tab before Micah could see. The stimulant felt rough against her fingertips, chalky surface promising temporary clarity at the cost of tomorrow's exhaustion. Just to keep steady hands during the session. Pod 247C measured exactly 12 feet square. She'd counted the polymer tiles during sleepless nights when the walls felt like they were closing in with each recycled breath. Their sleep alcoves stacked like shipping containers against the far wall, micro-kitchen wedged between the waste recycler and the central VR station that dominated their living space, like a chrome-plated altar to digital escape. Gray everything. Gray walls scarred with the desperation of previous tenants, scratches spelling out names, dates, desperate messages carved with fingernails and contraband tools when hope required physical expression. Gray ceiling tiles that never quite aligned properly, their surfaces stained with condensation patterns that looked like maps of nowhere. Gray morning light filtering through the single porthole that faced the building's central courtyard, where the air recyclers hummed their mechanical lullaby in rhythms designed to soothe rather than inspire.
Morning portion looks smaller,
Micah said without looking up from his learning tablet, stylus moving in careful strokes across geometry problems that seemed far too advanced for 14. At 14, he'd already mastered the art of observation without accusation. A survival skill that made Elara's chest tight with pride and guilt in equal measure. His voice carried that particular quality of someone who'd learned to see everything while pretending to notice nothing.
Dispenser's been glitchy.
The lie slipped out as smoothly as everything else she performed these days, words polished by repetition until they felt more real than truth.
Maintenance scheduled for next week.
The stimulant dissolved bitter under her tongue while she stirred artificial vanilla flavoring into their breakfast with movements that had become automatic as breathing. The chemical burn spread through her mouth, sharp, medicinal, promising 4 hours of clarity before the inevitable crash. Her hand remained steady as she portioned their meal, muscle memory overriding the tremor that wanted to betray her careful performance. Outside their window, the courtyard's central fountain sprayed recycled water in measured arcs, each droplet calculated for maximum atmospheric humidity by algorithms that cared nothing for beauty or wonder. The sound should have been soothing, water music in a world of mechanical rhythms. Instead, it reminded her of rain she'd never experienced outside virtual environments, of natural weather that existed only in digital simulations, crafted for those wealthy enough to afford authentic experiences.
Elara.
Micah's voice carried that careful note that meant he'd been thinking, processing observations with the methodical precision he applied to everything from mathematics to family survival. His stylus paused mid-equation, the scratching sound that had provided background rhythm suddenly absent.
You've been making those sounds again. At night?
her hand stilled on the spoon, sustainment clinging to the utensil like gray cement. The courtyard fountain continued its calculated display beyond the porthole, water catching pale morning light in patterns that spoke of engineering rather than artistry.
What sounds?
Like you're drowning in air.
The RWS symptoms were getting worse. Reality withdrawal syndrome, such a clinical name for feeling like her skin was too tight, like the world had lost its flavor and texture and meaning. Yesterday's session in Vastrathea had lasted 6 hours, all premium sensory enhancement that made every moment afterward feel flat and colorless by comparison. The phantom taste of honeyed wine still lingered at the back of her throat, making the bland sustainment seem like punishment for existing in the wrong reality.
Bad dreams?
She said, portioning the paste onto their plates, with movements that tried to project normalcy. The substance held no texture, no character, engineered by nutrition algorithms to provide optimal caloric intake with minimal resource expenditure or sensory pleasure. Each spoonful landed with soft plops that sounded like surrender.
Nothing serious.
Micah's stylus stopped moving entirely. When he looked at her, his eyes held too much understanding for someone who should still believe in easy answers and simple solutions. The learning tablet screen cast blue light across his face, highlighting the sharp cheekbones that reminded her too much of their father in his final days. All angles and hunger and careful observation of diminishing possibilities.
The job's eating you.
The job pays for your education pods. The job keeps us from sleeping in the corridors with the disconnects. Through the thin walls, she could hear their neighbor's morning coughing fit. Mrs. Koransky's dry hack that came from breathing recycled air for too many years. Lungs slowly drowning in atmospheric processing that prioritized efficiency over health. Each rasp echoed through polymer barriers that provided privacy but not silence, reminding everyone of what waited in the recycling queues.
The job's fine, Micah. Challenging, but fine.
Right.
He saved his work with deliberate precision, tablet clicking into its charging cradle with the finality of a closing door. The device's status light shifted from amber to green, joining the constellation of indicators that monitored their pod's life support systems, oxygen levels, atmospheric composition, the endless digital heartbeat that kept human cargo functioning at minimum expense.
And I'm sure Lord Ezreal Nightshade is a perfectly reasonable employer.
Heat flushed up her neck like spilled coffee, burning and immediate. The mirror ritual from last week, Julian claiming it was essential character development for Raya's upcoming storyline, words that tasted of lies dressed as professional necessity. She'd thought Micah was deep in his studies, earphones sealed tight, visual learning programs running their endless loops of optimized education. The haptic suit's feedback had made her lips tingle for hours afterward. Phantom sensations that lingered like evidence of crimes she couldn't name.
How did you...
Walls are thin. And you talk in your sleep now.
He stood with movements that carried the lanky grace of someone still growing into their frame. All elbows and careful hope despite the gray world pressing against their polymer sanctuary. His clothes hung loose. Everything did when clothing came from the standard allocation bins, sized for statistical averages rather than individual bodies.
Maybe I should get a job too. Take some pressure off.
Absolutely not.
The words came out harder than she intended, sharp enough to make Micah's shoulders tense, like he'd touched live wiring. The ventilation system cycled above them, drawing stale air from their pod and replacing it with marginally fresher recycled atmosphere that still tasted of metal and recycled dreams. She softened her voice. reaching for the warmth that came naturally with him and only him.
You're going to finish your education, test into a good placement, maybe even earn subscriber status legitimately. That's the plan.
Plans change.
Not this one.
They ate in silence, broken only by the mechanical hum of life support systems and the distant argument echoing through the walls from Pod 249C. The Kuransky family, their fights had become as regular as the morning nutrition cycle, voices rising through polymer barriers, in patterns that spoke of desperation wearing grooves in their relationship. Something about their daughter's VR hours exceeding recommended limits. Words that carried familiar weight in a world where escape cost more than most could afford. Elara wondered if their walls were thin enough for the Koranskys to hear her nighttime sessions, the verbal responses that leaked out, despite her efforts to stay silent. Did they catalog her performances the same way she documented theirs? Did they understand what survival looked like when wrapped in silk and starlight? The sustainment tasted like chalk mixed with artificial optimism, each bite carrying the flavor of hope processed through machines designed to sustain rather than satisfy. But Elara forced herself to finish every portion, texture dissolving on her tongue without resistance, engineered to minimize chewing time and maximize nutrient absorption. No pleasure in it, no comfort. Just function. The stimulant was kicking in now, making her fingers steady, and her thoughts sharp-edged like crystal cut to reflect light in specific directions. The world took on that peculiar clarity that came with chemical enhancement. Colors slightly too bright, sounds slightly too distinct. Reality given artificial precision that made everything feel both more real and less authentic simultaneously. Time to become someone else. Time to slide into silk and starlight, and pretend that her real life was the performance. Micah cleaned their dishes without being asked, movements efficient in the cramped space like a dancer who'd memorized every step. The water recycler hummed as it processed their minimal waste, part of the endless cycle that kept Hub 7 functioning. Human input converted to sterile output, lives reduced to manageable data streams.
Session today's a long one.
Standard 4 hours.
Another lie, smooth as the artificial vanilla that couldn't quite mask the metallic undertaste of everything in their world. Julian had booked 6 hours, with optional extensions that usually weren't optional when wealthy clients discovered new boundaries to test.
Should be back by dinner cycle.
He didn't believe her, but he wouldn't push. Not when pushing might make her defensive enough to do something stupid like refuse the work entirely. Smart kid. Too smart for his own good in a world that punished intelligence without connections, that turned observation into survival skills. No 14-year-old should need to master. Elara sealed herself into the haptic suit's embrace, synthetic skin molding to her body like a second self, desperate to provide comfort through technological precision. The material warmed to match her body temperature with eager efficiency, sensors aligning with nerve clusters along her spine and limbs, like lovers learning each other's geography. Each contact point whispered against her skin with micro vibrations that promised escape from the gray world, pressing against their polymer walls. The neural interface crown settled over her skull with familiar weight, dozens of micro contacts finding their designated positions along her scalp with the precision of surgeons' instruments. Each connection tingled as the system established neural pathways, mapping her consciousness with practiced hunger while her body remained safe in its cramped pod. She closed her eyes as the system ran its calibration sequence, reality dissolving at the edges, like watercolors in rain. Vastrathia began to bloom behind her eyelids, with the slow majesty of flowers opening to impossible sunlight. The transition felt like drowning in reverse. Suffocating gray existence giving way to impossible abundance. Her lungs learning to breathe magic instead of recycled hope. Gray polymer walls gave way to silver bark that gleamed like captured moonlight, each tree trunk wide enough to house entire families. The metallic taste of recycled air became the complex symphony of night-blooming jasmine and storm-touched ozone. Scents so rich and layered they made her dizzy with possibility. Her nose remembering what it meant to smell living things instead of processed atmosphere. Her cramped muscles relaxed into a body that moved like liquid starlight, silk robes flowing around her in defiance of physics and economic necessity. Every gesture felt graceful here, purposeful in ways her real movements never managed in the cramped confines of Pod 247C. Araya Dawnwhisper opened her eyes in the grove of celestial harmony. Ancient oaks stretched toward a twilight sky painted with aurora streams, their silver leaves catching light from 3 moons that hung motionless in perfect alignment. The trees themselves defied possibility. Trunks that told stories in bark carvings, branches woven together in mathematical precision while maintaining the illusion of natural growth. Every surface pulsed with soft blue light that spoke of magic older than civilization, deeper than the algorithms that governed her waking hours. Crystalline formations jutted from the earth in complex geometric patterns, each one humming with musical tones that layered into harmonies rich enough to taste. The crystals varied in size from delicate clusters, no larger than her fist, to towering spires that reached toward the woven branches overhead, their surfaces catching and refracting ambient light into rainbow cascades that painted the grove in constantly shifting colors. The air itself shimmered with suspended starlight, motes of luminescence that danced between her fingers when she raised her hand to conduct the cosmic symphony. Each breath brought flavors that had no names, the essence of possibility itself, sweet and intoxicating and utterly absent from her real world, where taste came in 3 artificial varieties. Every surface bore intricate runic carvings that pulsed with soft radiance, responding to her presence like flowers turning toward the sun. The ground beneath her bare feet was warm stone worn smooth by countless pilgrimages, alive with subtle vibrations that spoke of deep magic and deeper purpose. Her soles could feel the ancient power humming through crystalline veins, energy that connected every living thing in patterns too complex for mortal understanding. Water trickled somewhere in the distance, a stream that sang in harmony with the crystal formations. Wild water that had never known containment or calculation. Never been processed through machines designed to optimize rather than inspire. The sound should have reminded her of their pod's recycling fountain, but this was different. This was what water sounded like when it chose its own path. Home, whispered a treacherous part of her mind. This feels more like home than reality ever has. She pushed the thought down with practiced discipline and focused on her role. Raya Dawnwhisper, Oracle's chosen, blessed with the sight to read destiny in the dance of stars and souls. Mystical guide to the prophesied hero, bound by ancient ritual to channel the wisdom of ages into comprehensible guidance for mortal minds. All of it carefully crafted fiction designed to make Julian Kane feel special. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn, silk robes trailing luminous particles in her wake like a comet's tail. The fabric moved like captured starlight, each fold catching the grove's ambient radiance and reflecting it in patterns that shifted with her movement, beauty for beauty's sake, not because algorithms had calculated optimal visual appeal. Lord Asriel Nightshade emerged from between the crystal formations, his obsidian armor catching the grove's ethereal light and fracturing it into sharp-edged shadows that spoke of power contained but not controlled. The character design was flawless, tall and imposing, with aristocratic features and eyes like captured starlight, armor bearing intricate engravings that seemed to move in peripheral vision. Julian had paid premium rates for the enhanced avatar, and it showed in every perfectly sculpted detail, every precisely calculated proportion. But behind the digital perfection, she could feel Julian's attention like weight against her skin, hungry, possessive, growing more invasive, with each session like a parasite learning to feed more efficiently.
My oracle.
Azrael said, his voice carrying harmonic overtones that resonated in her bones like cathedral bells. The words echoed strangely among the crystal formations, creating layered reverberations that made simple speech sound profound and important, worthy of the magical setting that surrounded them. Raya inclined her head with practiced grace, letting starlight catch in her silver hair like captured moonbeams. The movement felt natural in this body, graceful in ways her real form never managed in the cramped confines of Pod 247C, where every gesture had to be calculated for spatial efficiency.
The celestial dance speaks of great things, my lord. Destiny stirs in the space between heartbeats.
She moved between the crystal formations with fluid steps, each gesture calculated to maintain the mystical atmosphere while keeping careful distance. Performance balanced on the knife's edge between authentic engagement and professional necessity. The crystals responded to her presence, their harmonies shifting into complex melodies that made the air itself seem to sing with anticipation. Flowers bloomed in her footsteps as she walked, impossible blossoms of silver and gold that released perfumes rich enough to make her dizzy with their complexity. Each scent carried layers of meaning that her real world had forgotten, beauty that existed for its own sake, rather than to serve algorithmic optimization. Julian had grown fond of these elaborate displays, the more theatrical the better, as long as every element reinforced his character's cosmic importance. But even as she performed, part of her mind catalogued the wrongness that crept through paradise, like hairline cracks in perfect crystal. The way Azrael's gaze lingered on the curve of her throat when she threw back her head to address the moons. The subtle way he positioned himself to block her retreat routes, movements that spoke of predator instincts disguised as character roleplay. It made her skin crawl beneath the silk, phantom sensations that had nothing to do with haptic feedback.
Tell me.
Azrael commanded, stepping closer than necessary, his voice dropping to a register that bypassed character entirely, and became Julian's voice wearing Azrael's digital face like an expensive mask.
What do the stars reveal of the trials ahead?
The prophecy flowed from her lips like honey, each word carefully crafted to stroke Julian's ego while maintaining the illusion of divine revelation. She spoke of challenges that would prove his worthiness, of powers yet to be awakened, of a destiny that stretched beyond the boundaries of this realm. The floating runestones began to orbit faster, leaving trails of silver fire in their paths as her voice rose to match the crystalline harmonies that surrounded them like a choir of artificial angels. Around them, the grove pulsed with responsive magic that cost nothing and meant everything. Moonbeams solidified into visible streams of light that followed her gestures with eager precision. Aurora colors bleeding across the perpetual twilight sky, in patterns that spoke of beauty unconstrained by economic necessity. The very air seemed to hold its breath for her words, reality, bending to accommodate the fantasy of his predetermined greatness.
The threads of fate converge.
She intoned, her fingers weaving patterns that left trails of silver fire in the air like calligraphy written in starlight. Each gesture called forth new wonders, blooming flowers, spiraling light, crystalline chimes that rang with impossible beauty.
In the hour of greatest darkness, when shadow seeks to devour light itself, the chosen shall rise. Your blade, my lord, shall pierce the veil between worlds.
The crystalline formations responded to her gestures with eager harmony, their songs building to crescendo as 3 beams of moonlight descended to strike Azrael's upturned face like spotlights in a cosmic theater. His obsidian armor blazed with reflected radiance, runes along the breastplate flaring to life in response to the celestial blessing. The light carved his features into something beyond mortal, divine, terrible, magnificent in ways that spoke to carefully programmed grandeur.
More.
Azrael commanded, stepping closer with movements that made the grove dim around them, except for the spotlight of moonfire that followed his movement like stage lighting. His armor clinked softly with each step, a sound that shouldn't exist in this magical space, but did because Julian wanted the authenticity of weight and substance, the reminder that his character was real enough to matter.
Tell me of the bond between Oracle and Chosen. The prophecies speak of shared destiny.
Elara's pulse quickened like a bird trapped in her chest, but Raya's expression remained serenely mystical, performance discipline, overriding personal discomfort, years of training maintaining the illusion despite alarms screaming in frequencies only she could hear.
The texts are ancient, my lord. Perhaps too sacred for casual interpretation?
Nothing is too sacred between us.
His gauntleted hand reached toward her face, stopping just short of contact, with the precision of someone testing boundaries. The haptic suit registered the proximity, phantom warmth radiating from his fingers without actual touch, technological intimacy that felt more invasive than physical contact.
The ritual scrolls mention a joining of essence, a melding of souls that transcends mortal understanding.
This isn't in any script we discussed. Elara's mind raced while Raya's face maintained perfect serenity, the disconnect between internal panic and external performance creating cognitive dissonance that tasted of copper and impending crisis. The grove around them seemed to lean closer, crystal formations tilting as if eavesdropping on conversations that were sliding beyond professional boundaries.
The joining you speak of?
Raya said slowly, choosing each word with the care of someone walking through a minefield.
Is one of purpose, not flesh? The oracle serves as conduit for divine will, channeling power to amplify the chosen's.
Show me.
The words hung in the shimmering air between them, like a challenge wrapped in silk, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Azrael's eyes held an intensity that made Elara's skin crawl beneath the silk robes, hunger that went beyond the character's scripted devotion to prophesy, and reached toward territories that violated both contract and consent.
My lord?
The joining. The amplification.
He gestured to the space between them, where motes of starlight danced in lazy spirals like. The light responded to his movement, coalescing into patterns that suggested connection, binding, possession disguised as mystical communion.
Surely the oracle's power can be demonstrated, not merely described.
Elara's mouth went dry as sand, saliva abandoning her tongue as if her body understood the danger before her mind could process it. This was new territory, uncharted waters that Julian was navigating without her consent, testing boundaries with the confidence of someone who understood exactly how much power wealth could purchase. The contract specified certain boundaries, certain limits that this request pushed against without technically crossing. But refusing a client's request mid-session could trigger complaints, contract reviews, potential termination. Julian knew this. He was counting on it. Micah needs his education pods. The thought cut through her hesitation like a blade forged from necessity. Their HAB unit rent was due in 3 days. The Kuransky's daughter had lost her position last month for refusing client requests, and now the family was facing relocation to the outer corridors, where the recycled air tasted more like metal and less like hope. Raya inclined her head with graceful acceptance that cost pieces of Elara's soul.
As you wish, my lord.
She began to weave the amplification ritual, her hands tracing complex patterns that called forth streams of luminescent energy from the surrounding crystals. The magic flowed between her fingers like liquid light, growing brighter as she shaped it with gestures that required precise timing and exact positioning. One wrong angle and the spell would collapse into harmless sparkles. In the game's normal mechanics, this would enhance Azrael's combat abilities or magical reserves, a standard buff spell dressed in mystical theater to justify premium rates. But as the energy built to crescendo, casting rainbow reflections off every crystal surface, Azrael stepped forward into the ritual circle with movements that spoke of hunger disguised as character development.
Connect with me.
He whispered, his voice dropping below the character's usual commanding tone and becoming something intimate, invasive, wrong. The words carried Julian's cadence, Julian's hunger, Julian's complete disregard for the boundaries they'd established when digital handshakes still meant something.
Let me feel what you feel.
The energy pattern faltered in her hands like a bird with a broken wing, power stuttering as her concentration fractured under the weight of violation, disguised as roleplay. This wasn't gameplay anymore. This was Julian pushing boundaries, testing how far he could make her go in the name of authentic roleplay, while knowing she couldn't refuse without consequences that extended beyond digital realms.
My lord, the ritual requires.
I said connect.
His hand closed around her wrist with the authority of someone accustomed to obedience, the haptic feedback making her skin burn where he touched. The sensation registered as pressure, warmth, possession, all transmitted through the suit's neural interface with perfect fidelity that made violation feel as real as breathing.
The prophecies demand it. Our bond demands it.
No. This isn't right. This isn't what I agreed to. But Ria's training overrode Elara's instincts like programmed responses crushing human judgment. The character's conditioning ran deeper than personal boundaries, years of performance discipline, forcing her to complete the ritual despite every internal alarm, screaming warnings in frequencies that made her bones ache with recognition. She channeled power through the connection point, where Azrael gripped her wrist, energy flowing between them in a golden circuit that made the grove blaze with supernatural light. For a moment, she felt the feedback loop that premium clients paid extra for, the sensation of shared consciousness, of boundaries dissolved between player and NPCs. Julian's mind pressed against hers through the connection like invasive surgery disguised as intimacy, hungry and possessive in ways that tasted of corruption and violated trust. She felt his satisfaction at her compliance, his pleasure at finding new ways to make her perform intimacy while maintaining plausible deniability. The joining of essence became something invasive, violating, a preview of worse demands to come. His thoughts tasted like corruption, beauty deliberately spoiled for the pleasure of watching it break.
Yes.
Azrael breathed, his grip tightening until she felt the pressure in her real wrist through the haptic feedback. Phantom pain that spoke of control exercised across digital distances.
This is what the prophecies promised. This is what I've been paying for.
The last words hit like ice water flooding her veins. Not what the character had been seeking, what Julian had been paying for. The client-breaking character to remind her of the transaction, of her powerlessness to refuse without consequences that extended far beyond virtual worlds. The grove's crystal songs turned discordant. Aurora streams flickering like damaged displays as even the digital paradise recognized the wrongness infecting its perfect algorithms. Raya maintained her serene expression even as Elara's stomach churned with recognition of what was happening and what would come next.
The ritual is complete, my lord. Your power is amplified tenfold.
For now,
Azrael released her wrist but remained standing too close, invading her personal space with deliberate intent that spoke of possession, disguised as character development. The scent of jasmine couldn't mask the underlying wrongness of his proximity, beauty corrupted by hunger that fed on discomfort.
but such magics require regular renewal, daily practice to maintain their potency.
He's setting up expectations for tomorrow's session. More touching. More boundary pushing. More elaborate justifications for violations dressed as enhanced gameplay.
The oracle serves at the chosen's pleasure.
Raya replied, the words tasting like ash despite the honeyed flavors that should have sweetened them. Each syllable felt like swallowing poison wrapped in sugar.
Yes,
Azrael smiled with satisfaction that bled through his characters, noble mask like infection through bandages.
she does.
The grove held its ethereal beauty around them, silver leaves catching impossible light, crystal harmonies weaving through air that tasted of starlight and possibility. But the wrongness lingered like a stain on silk, Julian's hunger polluting even this perfect digital sanctuary with the knowledge that beauty could be purchased and corrupted for the right price.
Come.
Azrael commanded, his voice returning to its character's imperious tone as he turned toward the grove's darker reaches, where shadows promised new stages for whatever performance he was crafting.
The shadow wraiths grow bold in their mountain lairs. They must be reminded of their place.
Raya fell into step behind him, silk robes whispering against the warm stone path, with sounds like secrets being shared against their will. The familiar routine began, Azrael's predetermined heroics playing out with the inevitability of a music box dancer, script she'd performed dozens of times with minor variations that always led to the same predetermined conclusion. Different monsters, same outcome. Different locations, same validation. The mathematics of ego disguised as adventure. When the session timer finally chimed and the grove began its dissolution sequence, Elara felt the familiar crash of returning consciousness magnified 100-fold. The beauty bled away like water through her fingers, crystal songs fading to mechanical hums, rich scents dissolving into recycled air. Warm starlight replaced by harsh lead strips, casting shadows across gray polymer walls. Reality felt like punishment after paradise, each sensation a reminder of what waited beyond digital escape. Chapter 2: Disrupted Harmonies. Something was wrong with the grove. Raya stood within the circle of prophecy, but the familiar crystalline harmonies carried discordant undertones that crawled beneath her skin like insects seeking warmth. The three moons flickered overhead like dying stars, their eternal alignment stuttering in jerky mechanical spasms as if the rendering system choked on unauthorized modifications. Shadows writhed independently of their sources, slithering between crystal formations that sang with frequencies sharp enough to make her teeth ache. The air itself tasted wrong, metallic copper where honeyed jasmine should bloom, ozone crackling with the bitter tang of violated code. Each breath burned her throat with the flavor of electrical storms and corrupted data streams. The sacred grove's silver trees twisted at unnatural angles, their bark weeping luminescent sap that pooled in patterns too geometric to be natural. Ancient runes carved into crystalline pedestals pulsed with sickly yellow light, their usual celestial blue, replaced by something that reminded Elara of infection. This isn't the standard dragon encounter, Elara realized beneath Raya's serene facade. Her haptic suit registered every wrongness. The way the warm stone beneath her feet now felt slick and yielding, like standing on something alive and sweating. Her starlight robes clung to her skin with unnatural moisture, the fabric's ethereal shimmer corrupted into oily rainbows that hurt to perceive directly.
My oracle.
Azriel's voice carried strange harmonics as he emerged from between the corrupted crystals, each syllable layered with subsonic frequencies that made her ribcage vibrate. His obsidian armor caught the flickering moonlight and fractured it into patterns that stabbed at her eyes. Geometric impossibilities that her brain refused to process properly. Steam rose from the gaps in his plate mail, carrying the scent of heated metal, and something organic that made her gag.
Change was not written in the celestial scrolls, my lord.
Raya's trained voice maintained its mystical cadence, even as wrongness pressed against her from all directions. The crystalline formations around them shrieked like tortured glass, their harmonious songs replaced by the sound of nails dragging across slate. Her bare feet could feel the stone circle's sacred geometry warping beneath her weight, angles shifting into configurations that made her inner ear scream warnings about impossible physics.
Perhaps?
Azriel said, stepping closer than their usual choreography demanded, his armored boots clanking against stone that now echoed with the hollow ring of an empty tomb.
The scrolls require revision.
His breath misted an air that had grown suddenly frigid, each exhalation carrying the metallic taste of old blood. The grove's ambient temperature dropped so rapidly that frost began forming on the crystal surfaces with sharp, crackling sounds like breaking bones. The grove shuddered. Reality tore. The sound came first, a wet, ripping noise like silk being shredded by claws, followed by the obscene squelch of something massive, forcing its way through dimensions that weren't meant to accommodate its presence. Writhing darkness burst through crystalline perfection, like infection through healthy flesh, reality splitting along jagged seams that bled shadow and corruption. Tentacles erupted from wounds in existence itself, their surfaces glistening with phosphorescent slime that caught the grove's dying light and twisted it into nauseating spectrums. Each appendage moved with alien intelligence that defied natural law, flowing like liquid mercury one moment, then snapping taut with muscular precision the next. The creature's flesh pulsed with veins of bioluminescence, creating patterns that hurt to follow. Hypnotic spirals that made Elara's vision blur with vertigo. The stench hit her like a physical blow, rotting seaweed mixed with the cloying sweetness of decay, undercut by something sharper that reminded her of heated plastic and burning hair. The haptic suit translated every molecule of that corruption directly into her olfactory system, making her retch with revulsion that felt utterly real.
My lord.
Raya's scream pierced the air as the first tentacle wrapped around her wrist with the sound of wet leather creaking under tension. The haptic feedback exploded through her nervous system. Cold slime that felt like touching raw fish left too long in the sun. Pressure that squeezed with deliberate cruelty. Texture that made every nerve-ending revolt in disgust. The creature's flesh pulsed against her pulse points, its alien heartbeat syncing with hers in a mockery of intimacy.
The creatures are not of this realm. Emergency exit. Use the emergency exit.
But Elara's fingers trembled uselessly on mental commands that dissolved like smoke whenever she tried to grasp them. Julian had modified the environment without her consent, violated their contract parameters with surgical precision. The creature's grip tightened with hydraulic pressure, another appendage sliding around her waist, like a serpent made of living slime and malevolent hunger. Every point of contact burned with wrongness. Not heat, but the opposite of warmth, a cold so profound it felt like frostbite spreading through her virtual flesh. The tentacle's surfaces rippled with thousands of tiny suckers, each one latching onto her skin through the robes with wet kissing sounds that made her stomach lurch with nausea. Azrael watched with undisguised fascination, his helmet's visor reflecting her terror in 100 fractured images. The obsidian surface showed her face twisted in genuine fear, multiplied into a kaleidoscope of anguish that fed back into itself.
The bond between Oracle and Chosen.
He murmured, his blade remaining sheathed despite her obvious peril, voice carrying undertones of satisfaction that made her skin crawl.
Must be tested in crucibles of adversity.
The tentacles moved with surgical precision, each touch calculated for maximum violation. Virtual claws sprouted from the creature's flesh like switchblades emerging from living sheaths, their edges sharp enough to part fabric with whispered cuts. The starlight-woven robes that had been her protection dissolved under their touch like tissue paper in acid, each tear accompanied by the soft sigh of expensive magic unraveling. Cold air kissed her exposed skin, the grove's corrupted atmosphere raising goosebumps across her arms and shoulders. The haptic suit translated every sensation with perfect fidelity. Phantom touch that felt more real than reality. Violation that registered in nerve endings that had never actually been touched. She struggled against bonds that defied the grove's usual physics, her mystical powers suddenly impotent, against Julian's carefully scripted helplessness. More tentacles emerged from the shadows with wet, sliding sounds like enormous snails leaving trails of luminescent mucus. They wrapped around her ankles with crushing force, their flesh warm and pulsing with alien circulation. She could feel the creature's blood moving beneath their skin, thick, sluggish fluid that pumped in rhythms that had no relation to any earthly heartbeat.
Trust in our celestial connection.
Azrael said, but his rescue came with deliberate slowness, each step accompanied by the hollow clank of armor that echoed through the grove like funeral bells. He drew his blade with theatrical grace, obsidian steel emerging from its sheath with the sound of singing metal, its edge gleaming as more tentacles erupted from the corrupted earth, with sounds like wet concrete cracking.
Let the darkness teach you the value of light.
He's enjoying this.
The realization cut through Raya's performance, like ice through silk. Julian hadn't made a mistake, or encountered a system glitch. This violation was intentional, planned, paid for with premium rates and coded exemptions. The AI systems that should have flagged content violations remained curiously silent, their watchful algorithms blinded by administrative overrides that money could purchase. A massive appendage wrapped around her throat like a living collar, its surface textured with ridges that scraped against her skin. Not quite tight enough to trigger safety protocols, but close enough to flood her system with primal terror that tasted of copper and adrenaline. The creature's alien flesh pulsed against her pulse points, each throb a reminder of her complete helplessness. Its skin felt like wet rubber studded with tiny thorns, each one pricking her throat with needle-sharp promises. Virtual tears streamed down her face, their salt taste mixing with the metallic flavor of fear that coated her tongue. The crying wasn't performance anymore. Genuine terror leaked through Raya's mystical composure as her body's autonomic systems responded to stimuli that felt utterly, horribly real.
Please, my lord?
Her voice cracked with authentic desperation, each word scraping her throat raw. The tentacle around her neck vibrated with subsonic frequencies that made her bones ache, its grip tightening fractionally with each plea.
The shadows seek to claim your oracle.
Asriel's advance remained deliberately measured, each footstep timed to maximize her torment. His blade carved lazy arcs through the air with metallic whistles, severing lesser tentacles with surgical precision, while avoiding the major appendages that held her captive. Each cut released spurts of phosphorescent ichor that painted the grove in nauseating colors, sickly greens and yellows that reminded her of infected wounds. The severed appendages writhed on the ground like dying snakes, their cut ends sealing with wet, sucking sounds. The largest tentacle pressed against her chest with the weight of a python, its alien flesh warm and pulsing with life that felt sickeningly real. The creature's surface rippled with waves of muscle contraction, each movement designed to remind her of her vulnerability. Virtual nerve endings screamed as the thing explored her exposed skin with deliberate thoroughness, mapping every tremor and gasp with predatory intelligence. Tiny tendrils sprouted from its main mass like seeking fingers, each one leaving trails of slime that felt like cold honey mixed with motor oil. The grove's dying crystal songs harmonized with her sobs, creating a symphony of violation that would echo in her nightmares for weeks. The sound waves resonated through her bones, making her skeleton sing with frequencies that spoke of corruption and despair.
The darkness recognizes power.
Asriel observed, finally moving within striking distance with steps that splashed through puddles of luminescent slime. His helmet's visor reflected her tears, multiplying her anguish into infinite fractals of suffering that stretched away like mirrors facing mirrors.
It seeks to corrupt what is most pure.
The massive blade found the creature's heart with theatrical precision, steel sliding through alien flesh with the sound of metal parting water. Light exploded from the wound like a star being born, washing the grove in harsh white radiance that burned away shadows and corruption. The creature's death scream shattered crystal formations throughout the grove, their harmonious songs replaced by the sound of 1,000 wind chimes being destroyed simultaneously. Alien flesh dissolved into sparkling motes that tasted of ozone and regret, each particle stinging her exposed skin like electrical discharges. The tentacles released her with coordinated precision, their grip loosening all at once, as if controlled by a single dying mind. She collapsed to her knees among the shattered crystals, their sharp edges cutting through her remaining robes as she gathered the remnants around herself with hands that shook despite her mystical training. The stone circle felt wrong beneath her knees, too warm, too soft, like kneeling on something that had once been alive. Broken crystal shards glittered around her like fallen stars, each one singing a different note of loss and violation.
Your intervention saves not merely this humble oracle.
She managed, forcing gratitude past lips that still tasted of fear and alien slime.
But the very fabric of destiny itself.
The words came out hoarse, her throat raw from screaming and the tentacles' crushing embrace. Each syllable felt like swallowing broken glass mixed with honey. Asriel stood triumphant among the wreckage, his armor unmarked by battle he'd barely participated in. Steam rose from his obsidian plates, carrying the scent of heated metal and something organic that made her gag. The three moons struggled back into alignment overhead, their light stuttering like dying fluorescent bulbs as the grove systems attempted to restore normal parameters. But damage had been done that went beyond rendered environment or scripted narrative. The grove would never feel safe again. Every shadow would hide potential horrors. Every beautiful surface would carry the memory of violation.
The oracle's gratitude illuminates the darkness.
He said, satisfaction bleeding through his character's noble pronouncements like poison through silk. His voice carried new harmonics now, possessive undertones that made her skin crawl with recognition.
Our bond grows stronger through shared trials.
Shared.
Elara wanted to laugh at the bitter irony, but only bile rose in her throat. Julian had shared nothing except his pleasure at her violation, his satisfaction at finding new ways to push boundaries while maintaining plausible deniability. The tentacles had been his hands, their violation his desires made manifest through premium haptic technology and administrative overrides that money could purchase.
Perhaps,
Raya said, her voice carrying only the slightest tremor as she rose to her feet on legs that shook like newborn foals, crystalline shards crunching beneath her bare soles.
such trials test the very foundations of trust itself.
The grove's crystal formations began their slow regeneration, hairline crack sealing with sounds like ice forming over still water. Algorithms restored corrupted beauty with mechanical precision, but the scent of jasmine couldn't quite mask the lingering organic corruption that clung to the air like smoke. Aurora streams above flickered with colors that had no names, sickly purples and yellows that hurt to perceive directly.
Trust is forged in fire.
Azrael replied, his helmet's eye slits gleaming with something that wasn't entirely character-driven satisfaction. The reflection in his visor showed her face streaked with tears and luminescent slime, a portrait of violation that he studied with obvious pleasure.
Tonight's trial was merely the first of many.
He's setting expectations. More violations, more boundary pushing, more elaborate justifications for his hunger.
Elara catalogued every word, every gesture, building evidence of Julian's escalating predation, even as Raya maintained her mystical composure through sheer force of professional will.
The oracle serves a destiny's pleasure.
She said, the ritual words tasting like ash mixed with alien secretions in her mouth.
Yes,
Azrael smiled beneath his helm, the expression audible in his voice's honeyed poison.
she does.
The session timer chimed with jarring abruptness, its mechanical precision a violent intrusion into their violated paradise. The sound cut through the grove's restored harmonies like an alarm clock shattering dreams. Beauty began bleeding away like watercolors in rain, crystal songs fading to silence, starlight dimming to gray fluorescent buzzing, the taste of jasmine dissolving into recycled air that smelled of plastic and electrical components. Elara gasped in her haptic suit as reality crashed over her like ice water. Pod 247C's gray walls seemed grayer than before, their polymer surfaces bearing witness to nothing more profound than another transaction completed. But her hands shook as she removed the neural crown, phantom sensations crawling across skin that the tentacles had never actually touched. Her throat felt raw from screaming that had happened only in virtual space. Her wrists ached where alien flesh had gripped with hydraulic pressure that existed nowhere but in nerve signals fed directly to her brain. The credits transferred automatically. Premium rates for premium violation, numbers that glowed green in her peripheral display. Enough to keep Micah fed and housed and safely ignorant of what his sister endured for his future. But the taste of corruption lingered in her mouth like a promise of worse things to come, metallic and organic and utterly wrong. Through the thin walls she could hear their neighbor's evening coughing fit, wet rattling sounds that spoke of lungs slowly drowning in recycled air. The Karanskis were fighting again, their voices carrying through polymer barriers that provided privacy but not silence. Somewhere in the distance, a maintenance drone hummed its mechanical lullaby, while the recycled air whispered of metal and recycled dreams and the endless cycle of human cargo being processed through systems that cared nothing for dignity or consent. This was just the beginning, she realized as she sealed the haptic suit into its storage compartment with hands that still trembled. Julian had found new ways to feed his hunger, and the AI systems that should have protected her remained curiously blind to violations dressed as enhanced gameplay and paid for with administrative overrides. The grove was corrupted now, its perfect beauty stained with something that would never quite wash clean. Every future session would carry the memory of tentacles and violation, beauty poisoned by the knowledge of what Julian was willing to do when he thought no one was watching. And tomorrow's session timer was already counting down, numbers glowing red in the corner of her vision like a countdown to fresh horrors. Outside her porthole window, the courtyard fountain sprayed its calculated arcs under the artificial stars of Hub 7's ceiling. The water caught the light like tears, falling in patterns that spelled nothing but the mathematics of optimal atmospheric control. Each droplet followed trajectories calculated for maximum efficiency, just like her sessions, just like her life, just like everything in this gray world where human needs were secondary to algorithmic optimization. But in the depths of recycled dreams, tentacles writhed through violated paradise, and Azrael's satisfied smile promised that trust was indeed forged in fire, even when that fire consumed everything she'd once held sacred, leaving nothing but ash and the memory of beauty defiled.